Hi.
All right. Hello, everyone.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah. So many chairs for this stage.
Yeah, we have. So anyone who wants to join us on stage is welcome.
Yeah, there's 3 seats here.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, this is fun because we are just going to have a conversation. This could be a podcast. We had an earlier conversation this morning, so but excited to kind of talk a little bit about like our different perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Coming from both the public side and the private side, but all hopefully working towards the same thing in terms of building founder communities, whether at the local level, regional, or global level. But yeah, and I'll share something very. I think I'd share with you, but this is actually my first time here in Copenhagen and actually the Nordics. So I've had the opportunity to be in many different parts of the world, and it's been far too long since I've actually been able to come here. But now I'll have to come back for a much longer trip. So.
Yeah, but that's good because that means that you have a fresh view on things, right?
True,
We've been. So in Europe, we tend to kind of keep talking among ourselves and have kind of fixed ideas of how things go. But you come with a fresh view. So maybe you can share a bit what your first impressions are.
Well, there's definitely a lot of bicycles compared to San Francisco, Silicon Valley, where I'm from. But
San Francisco has a bit more hills as well.
More hills, yeah. And your bike will. I'm actually surprised. A lot of the bikes that I've seen here, people don't lock up. Is that true?
Yeah, well, I guess it's more safe here than San Francisco.
Even if you lock your bike in San Francisco, it will get stolen. So unfortunately, but it's definitely a very beautiful place. One thing that was interesting to see is it's a good coming in with a fresh perspective. I had the opportunity, thanks to the TechBBQ team, to attend a Nordic LP forum a couple days ago, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Denmark was the opening remarks, and the message I certainly heard from him was about really bringing in entrepreneurship to help grow the economy, and that there was a lot of support for that. And I'm hearing that from many different governmental bodies around the world, certainly in a lot of the markets that we have a presence in. I have to admit, in terms of the broader European scene, but also with the Nordics, it's definitely, I'm not an expert in it by any means, so I'm actually really curious from your perspective, with that kind of message from someone at that level, do you see that as having an impact in a positive way in terms of actually driving change? What has really helped drive actual change in terms of making it easier for startups to grow or venture to grow, like either in Netherlands or here or in Europe broadly?
Yeah, I think so. Governments have become very active in stimulating tech and entrepreneurship, but it depends very much on your culture and your kind of governance, if that is kind of top down or very bottom up.
Yeah.
So typically. Some of the kind of newer regimes will say we want to tech, or more directive regimes like Singapore or the Gulf, but even in France, it can be very directive, very ambitious, very strategic, and that's good, I think, as a start, because you see a lot of public money going in and a lot of also kind of the regulatory frameworks being developed. So that's good. Then you typically over time see that there is a certain dependency on government, which is not healthy, because I think a good policy will also always be trying to crowd in private money, private initiative, and so for instance, if you look at the Netherlands, we have my organization is an independent foundation, because the government felt it really hard to do what we do in the government, and it's very much a bottom-up thing. So we sometimes look at France and we think, I would love to have that kind of strategic guidance, because it's so clear. You call the president and say, we need a better startup visa, we need more money going into deep tech or whatever, and he can just make it happen. Whereas in our country, I'm kind of sometimes lobbying my own government, even though they pay me, to do kind of proactive startup policy. But in the end, I would think organizations like ours shouldn't exist. I don't think you have them in Silicon Valley.
No, not so much.
You have like your Global 500, but also Y Combinator has supported more startups than most of our countries together. So private initiatives could actually do at least as well, or maybe better than these public initiatives.
Yeah.
So what have you seen? Because you have been investing across so many countries, but I note that you're not present in Europe actually. So I would like actually to hear two things. So what have you seen elsewhere, and why is it that that you're not actually present in Europe?
Yeah. So the first question, I think for those listening, with 500 Global, we're previously known as 500 Startups, which I think a lot of people still remember the brand. We need to do a better job on pushing our new brand. But today, 500 is at about $2.5 billion in AUM, more than 2,900 portfolio companies invested to date. They represent about 80 countries around the world, and we have about 300 or so that are in Europe broadly, 35 to 40 in the Nordics, interestingly. So we do invest in many markets around the world, but where we have people on the ground, because we really believe that to be a truly global venture capital firm, you have to be hyper-local on being on the ground. The fly-in, fly-out model really doesn't work in the long run. But for us, we are based in the US, in Silicon Valley. Our office is now in downtown Palo Alto. But we also have managing partners, investment partners, and people on the ground in markets like Latin America, Southeast Asia, Middle East, North Africa, Eastern Europe, Taiwan, Korea, and those are kind of the main hubs for us.
Yeah. So
now,
basically everywhere, but not in Europe.
Not in Europe. Well, people say that about China as well, but there's a lot of reasons for that. But so with Europe, we actually, like I mentioned, our portfolio includes about 300 or so companies. Some of them are pretty, big names, and some there's a little bit of a blurry line in terms of maybe they started in Europe and then they moved to the U.S. and they're now established and headquartered in the U.S., but they have European roots. So it's kind of depends on how you define it, but. I think for us, a lot of our focus in terms of where we saw opportunity, because as we were growing, there's always so many things you want to do, and limited by people, resources, et cetera, is we saw quite a bit of opportunity to focus on these markets that now internally we call rise economies. So markets that are, maybe you would see them as emerging markets or kind of larger populations, fast growing in terms of either population, tech penetration, or even GDP growth, even if they're starting at a point pretty far behind. But for us, like those have been actually really interesting to go into, and we just felt like we were better positioned to be able to win in those markets. Now with Europe, we have run a number of programs and made many investments in different parts of Europe. I think, though, it takes a different approach with the more mature markets, right? Because, Europe, U.S., Europe, China, et cetera, they're much more mature in terms of venture capital funding. And I think we saw a lot more, I guess we felt a lot more willingness in terms of all the various players in the ecosystems, like a Southeast Asia or whatnot, to help really drive entrepreneurship. And that's kind of why we spent a lot of time there.
Yeah. Well, actually, we've seen that Sequoia has now gone into really early stage, actually even close to venture building with and some of the big funds have maybe during the recent time where the larger rounds were basically not really flowing and the funds were moving to really early stage. I mean, that's really where you are. You are the quintessential kind of pre-seed seed investor. So they are actually doing this in Europe too. Does it mean that they have a different perspective? Because we actually feel that there is still quite a considerable funding gap right at that early stage. So we would actually benefit a lot from having a fund like yours active in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about your take on this, but I was talking with some meetings in the past couple of days, and they made a remark specifically about Denmark and the Nordics, but I feel like I've heard this in Saudi, in Southeast Asia, in Mexico, that at the very early stages, there actually are investors, like either angels or smaller seed funds. They don't get to be very large, but there is funding there. But as a company scales up, there's really not much there, because if you're thinking about a Series A, Series B, require larger funds, there are not too many Series A, Series B funds in a lot of these regions. So foreign capital doesn't necessarily want to invest at that stage either. It's still too early.
Yeah.
Growth stage pre-IPO, it's probably broader, but it seems like it's like that Series A, Series B. That's a huge gap in the funding market.
Yeah.
And I'm curious your take in terms of where the gaps are. I know there's always a lot of gaps everywhere, but specifically in terms of funding.
Yeah.
Because I think,
So actually, I think that's in volume, that's true.
Yeah.
But in the really early stage, there might be a lot of informals and there's government money, but there's not a lot of professional capital.
Right, okay.
So, and actually, you see that the companies that are that either manage to get some really professional angels on board or manage to get more structural funding in the early stages are much more professional in the way they approach their funding strategies. So we see that a lot of companies actually get bogged down later on because they made mistakes in the really early stages. And you have to clean their cap table and you have to find an investor that's actually willing to do that. So and so those companies are typically, they have to be real outperformers for an investor to come in and say, okay, I'll take on the hassle of cleaning the cap table. And so we're seeing a lot of that. So we actually would still benefit from kind of more professional investors in the early stage as well. And particularly in the area of deep tech, which I know is not exactly your sweet spot, but there a lot of funding is needed before there's even a sight of a product market fit. And that's a different kind of investor that we currently miss, actually.
Yeah. Have you seen much in terms of any stages, but like how much of that is coming from, I think we talked about this morning, like how much is coming from local investors versus, kind of foreign capital coming in, and where do you think that the most growth will be in the next few years for Europe?
So I think we're seeing a lot of early stage funding coming from the governments in areas that are strategic. So in quantum computing, biotech, semiconductors, so optics, all these kind of areas which are more driven by geopolitical strategy, I would say. So more about independence. I think COVID and now also the war in the Ukraine have shown that we have dependencies that that are very risky. So I think that's a big source of extra capital. And then I think in the traditional VC areas like SaaS companies or fintechs, the ones that are the most successful, most high growth ones would typically immediately go to some of the top tier funds. So they would either go to the US or big funds like Atomico or Northzone or EQT. They would and they would basically skip the domestic market. So but that's a typical profile. And
interesting. I'm curious. Like, so I mean, since the title of our conversation is around community. Right now in Europe, do you feel, and particularly in the Nordics, like what's your gauge on the kind of the startup entrepreneurial community and what is good, what needs work? I know you mentioned that Denmark is very entrepreneurial, so at least from maybe cultural acceptance of being a founder, at least you don't have that hurdle. But what is the gap, you think, in terms of being more on the global map, maybe, in terms of startups? Yeah,
I think the Nordics are quite exemplary in the sense that they, you have Slush, you have the TechBBQ, but you also have obviously the founders of Klarna, of Spotify. They're all very active in building funds, starting new companies. So there's, I think, a real, I think, quite a strong community here. You have ByFounders, which is a founder-led investment fund that is actually reinvesting in the next generation of Nordic founders. And so that's, I think, really, really powerful. And it's something that we're building in the Netherlands as well. So we don't have the kind of geographical space like the Nordics, but so we're doing mostly in the Netherlands, where we are trying to connect with the senior founders that have been, that have exited or that are still running a unicorn, and to make sure that they actually kind of pay back through their through their experience, payback through time, resources, and others. So that this is like that the ecosystem starts to, or actually the community of entrepreneurs starts to become much more independent and self-supporting. And so for now, our angel communities are completely fragmented. Yeah. And I think here in the Nordics are much more organized, actually, which is a really good thing, because once you start building those relationships, you can co-invest, you can do bigger investments, there's much more experience, you know where to go to, you refer to each other. That kind of networks are crucially important, but they're not that easily built. You have to really have enough people. You have to have events like this or other events where people get to know each other, and you have to actively build that. And you have to have people. I mean, like in Sweden, you have Daniel Ek and others that actually, do events to bring those people together, and they also cross over in other countries. I know they collaborate with a lot of German VC to do specific projects now, especially around things like green steel, like pretty difficult, hardcore hardware stuff that they're also collaborating on. That wouldn't have happened like 20 years ago. So.
Yeah, that's actually such a good point, and definitely it's a very honest plug for TechBBQ. But like these types of events, I mean, it's not the silver bullet, of course. It's not like any one event series is going to make or break, or any one investor or any one founder. But I think these types of, the team has worked very hard. I mean, I met with them last year. They came to Silicon Valley, so they were doing their own roadshow to promote the conference, the Nordics, and I think that's what you need. You need like those hubs or those kind of whatever term you want to use, cheerleaders or kind of ringleaders that really want to grow whatever community. I'm sure there's a huge element that in terms of what you've done with TechLeap and with TechBBQ. I mean, I think that's definitely something in terms of more visibility for the Nordics. Yeah. But I don't know what the breakdown is. I know it's not everybody is not from here. There's
I think it's now
Europe.
40 Danish and 60 or some percent foreign.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's actually I actually think that's even better, because then again, the founders here are more on the map in terms of it's not just just in this one country, but kind of the ability to scale the company beyond and also investor interest, and so I think that's really compelling.
Can I ask you a question as a newcomer to this to this? So sometimes I feel that in other countries, in many of the countries that you mentioned before, there is a much stronger sense of urgency and drive and hunger. A country like Denmark or the Netherlands, why would you become an entrepreneur? I mean, you can get a really decent job. Healthcare is paid for. Education is paid for. So you must be pretty stupid to become an entrepreneur, or you have to be really driven. But to build, it's nice. And we've seen that. Actually, we did a piece of research into ambition levels. Yeah. We found that in the Netherlands, entrepreneurship is regarded really highly, and people want to become entrepreneurs. But they don't want to build big companies because it's a big hassle, right? You lose a lot of your independence. So the drive to be an entrepreneur is because of a cultural feeling or individual feeling of independence. Yeah. But once you build a company that's bigger than 20 people, you have your processes. Once you bring in a foreign investor, then you lose a lot of your autonomy. So there's actually an internal kind of drive not to be too ambitious and grow fast. Do you feel that too? Is that something that you've seen here?
I mean, again, this is like my first trip here, and I don't want to assume, but I've actually heard that a lot from local Danes here, that's definitely a very real barrier in terms of, whether the people or the country want this or not, but in terms of really big outcomes like unicorns or, big names, you pay a price to get to that level. It's just the reality, right? And I think, when you talk about some of the great benefits of being here, like the healthcare is paid, like all of that, to me, I hear that as an American, and I think, oh my goodness, it sounds like heavenly, because the system in the U.S. is just the complete opposite, right? It's so much more. There's really not, in my opinion, there's nothing like what what is here in terms of just those types of social support services. But in terms of, say, just very pragmatically, when we're talking about technology and tech innovation and these big category generational iconic companies, like there's, I think, a good reason why that kind of innovation happens in the U.S. There's always pros and cons. It's a double-edged sword, but I think because both for people who are born there or people come from different circumstances, maybe they're immigrants to the country, there is probably more of that sense of urgency, like either a drive to make it. There's a lot of role models they see. They want to be the next so-and-so or CEO, right? And there's no, I guess there's no, lifestyle there is no lifestyle. I mean, there is no work-life balance. So I think that's, when you get to that point. So I think for here, that potentially is actually a very real barrier in terms of the willingness to really get into that hustle. Yeah. At least just, again, as from my experience, you see this with every founder around the world, and that's something they oftentimes have to push against, and it's a struggle that wherever they're coming from, either culturally it's not accepted, or it's just hard to start, or there's not much urgency to grow the company to be a $1 billion company. It's like, why, right?
Yeah.
So,
because that's a funny thing, is that governments here in Europe try to make it as easy as possible for startups, because they try to remove all kinds of barriers. Would you say that's the wrong strategy, that you have, that actually overcoming the barriers makes you stronger?
I think that, so what kind of barriers do you think they focus on?
So if there's not enough funding, you put public money in. If there's not enough, if you, in terms of talent, we'll have talent programs, or you have publicly funded incubator programs, accelerator programs around universities. We do all that kind of stuff to try to make it easier. Or should you just let entrepreneurs do whatever?
I think I get what you mean. I mean,
you as a fund, do you do a lot of support to your entrepreneurs? Do you try to help them in any possible way, or is it quite okay that they kind of have to, make their own learnings? And
I mean, ultimately, there's a lot of things that investors will do or the government will do to make it easier. I think the things that you described, they're not. There's like specifically for the publics or for the government. There's a lot of things that they can do on the policy level to make it easier. Like, let's say, when it comes to talent, if it's hard to find local talent, is immigration easy or not? In the U.S., as an example, it's how so many amazing companies have been born, talent has come in, but now as immigration's harder and harder, I feel like we're going to lose that battle if it keeps going like this in terms of, when you look over the border at Canada, they've gone the other way. They've really taken advantage in terms of making it just so much easier, and they're going to attract all that talent. It's really as a child of an immigrant parents, it's really sad to see, honestly. So I think when I look at other markets in terms of how they see their growth happening, especially if they have their own natural population decline, immigration is the way to go. You don't think of that immediately connected to startups, but it certainly is in terms of founders maybe coming to a certain market, or they are like me, child of immigrants coming into that market, but they are very much citizens of that country. Yeah. Then those are the types of things the government can help with. Yeah. Maybe on the taxes. Taxes are always one really impactful.
Taxes help. Yeah. And most startups don't pay that much taxes anyway, do they?
Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah. Or even like on the investor side, there have been markets where, say, convertible notes or safes are really the standard in terms of early stage investing, but in some countries that sometimes have been considered illegal.
Yeah, right.
Or investors don't understand that. But it's like those types of things that the government can help with in terms of removing those types of barriers. But in terms of, I don't think it really helps the founders in terms of, it's still going to be hard to run the company. But
so government can remove barriers and basically stay out the way, right? Or not yeah.
It's interesting because in the U.S.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
No, because this is the thing. If you have public money, it's very easy to want to do good, right? So you find that a lot of these initiatives have the best intentions, but they basically postpone the confrontation with the real market. So we put them in incubators and we provide environments and stuff, but that's not a real, an incubator that, you run an accelerator as well, right? It's something that is, you've got skin in the game, and which is different than these public organizations that basically give all the service for free.
Yeah, I also think that I've seen as an example in some countries where there is maybe a top-down push for creating unicorns or whatnot, and the goals that are set are just seem out of touch with what reality is, like generating 10xing your unicorns in a very short amount of time. It is definitely ambitious, but in reality it doesn't, especially now post 2021, companies don't become unicorns in 5 years. Yeah. It takes like 10 years.
Oh, you can. It's very easy. No, there's a formula for that. So any country every country that wants unicorns, is really easy. You give a company 10 million, and you ask and you get 1% for that. It's pretty easy. If you put 100 million in a company, you get 10% of the company, and you got a unicorn, right? You're seeing so much public money going into this sector, and then governments claiming, wow, we got all these unicorns. It's an easy formula. I don't think it's sustainable.
Yeah, it's not sustainable.
But if you have that as an ambition, and I think a lot of the governments also are playing a bit of a kind of an innovation theater, right? And are not investing really in the fundamentals, but that want to show unicorns. I'm guilty of that myself. So when we set up our new program, the government wanted like a top line, a KPI, and so we said, okay, we'll do 2 or 3 unicorns a year, and we had this phrase of we'll become a unicorn nation or something, and that policymakers love that. They think it's really cool. Of course, it has nothing to do with reality. We're not building any unicorns. It's companies doing it themselves. We're not pouring in money at all. So it's really an ambition. And I tried to explain that later. The ambition is that we create an environment in which unicorns can actually emerge.
Yeah.
And it's not because the government is raising unicorns like this.
Yeah.
But it's for policymakers. It's attractive to do that. I just have to point out, there's you can ask questions on Slido. I don't know, do we get them on the screen, or if there are questions, we'll get them on the screen? Great. Okay. So if you want to ask questions, that's fine. Otherwise, we just keep on talking, and then somebody's going to kick us off the stage.
Questions?
So
yeah.
Or we can just keep talking.
Yeah, I think I was supposed to help with the questions. I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Now the stage is wobbling. You see that?
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
But
we don't come crashing through the all behind the scenes.
No earthquakes. So.
Do we have questions?
No.
If there are,
or you can, or we can just keep talking.
You can just keep talking.
No problem.
If any questions pop up, I will ask you.
Okay.
Sure, you have a question. Yeah, you do. Yeah. Okay. Measurement. So is there any way, the question is there any way governments can make these programs measurable, and successful? Yeah, no, of course you can. But it's really important what you measure too, right? So you can, as you measure unicorns, that's what you're going to get is what you're going to get. What you can measure, for instance, what we measure is hard to fill vacancies. So how, if you identify the kind of critical vacancies in the sector and how long a time it takes to fill them, and bringing back that time is an indicator, for instance, for talent, or money raised. But then you have to look at what money raised. Is it public or private? So, or how much foreign investment are you actually crowding in? Those things you can actually measure, and there are policies that you can make to make it attractive. So yeah, you can. And And I think the good programs do actually measure outcome.
Yeah. I think a lot of the governments that we've worked with, they do want to look at those types of things, right? And certainly job creation, funding levels, how many of them are able to raise the next downstream capital, or raise funding from downstream capital in the next round. Thankfully, I mean, I think if they're measuring how many IPOs have happened, I mean, that's not, it goes back to your point earlier about how realistic it is or how out of touch or not it is. But I think one of the most important things is certainly that governments really understand that this is a long-term investment, right? I mean, Silicon Valley is an example. There are a lot of markets that we hear that they say they want to be, Silicon Valley mindset, or they want to bring Silicon Valley there, but you forget that it's had the benefit of decades and decades of cycles to get to where it is. And many, like Southeast Asia is a region that we're very active in. It's grown significantly since we first started investing. Our first investment there was in 2011. And in our own portfolio, there's been 3 IPOs. 2 of them were on the U.S. exchanges. One of them was local in Indonesia. It was the country's first tech IPO. So it's definitely, there's a lot of eyes on that region and a lot of funding there. But it's still, in many ways, it still needs time.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's something that sometimes, both on the corporate side, interestingly, corporates but governments, they forget that. The ROI cannot be measured after 2-3 years for early stage funding, or early stage companies.
Yeah.
It really, it's going to be a 10-20 year game for it to be sustainable, right? Not this artificial stuffing the money down the.
Actually, one point about measurement is some of the stuff that we do is really hard to measure, like building a community. Because then you have to measure, and we actually had a long discussion about this, like meaningful connections. How many connections have we been able to facilitate? And you can get lost in trying to measure that kind of stuff. At a certain point, you have to also believe in something. So we believe that a community is important and peer-to-peer learning is important because our founders tell us that they want to learn only from other founders and that are 2 years ahead of them. So if we facilitate that, we can try to measure that and measure the value of that. So we do that through MPS, in our programs, and that's probably the best thing, that you can actually measure. But it also, at a certain point, it comes down to belief, and for instance, feeling that you're part of something bigger. Like, how do you measure that? And making it more than just gathering some entrepreneurs, but trying to build a brand. What's the brand value? I don't know. It just turned out that when the government tried was thinking about cutting our budget, that suddenly the TechLeap brand was really valuable. We got pledges of all kinds of organizations and companies and founders that wanted to support us. And we said, hey, wait, we never measured actually what the goodwill was that we developed as a program in terms of our brand. And now we notice, because we were hiring a new management team, and we had on every one of our vacancies, we had over 500 people applying. So we thought, hey, wait a minute, that might be an indicator of doing something good, because people want to work for this purpose. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to make it really quantitative.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of questions from the audience now. Thank you. Any famous companies in your anti-portfolio, and why did you say no? Any red flags?
Yeah. That's to you, I guess.
I think there's, if you ask the different partners in our team, they'll probably have different answers. I'll share this one because it's timely. So I did pass on Instacart, which is kind of sad now. But the reason why I said no at the time was I just thought it was too expensive. So I think there's always going to be those types of companies where if you pass for that type of reason, like the price, then in the long run maybe it didn't matter. But I don't necessarily. Despite they are planning to go public in the next imminently. Even though it's at a lower valuation market cap than what they'd raised at, but nonetheless, there's a lot of eyes on the ARM IPO they just went public, I think today or yesterday, and then Instacart, Klaviyo, Turo is just a car rental company. There's a lot of eyes on these IPOs, certainly, in terms of hoping to unfreeze or defrost the IPO market. But I mean, for me, it's just funny to say, but I don't necessarily regret it, because I think as an investor, you do want to think about what's your criteria. You want to be disciplined as an investor, and in that case, it didn't, price-wise, it didn't feel right at the time. But you make your peace with your rejections, and you learn a lot from the no's that go on to be great and the yeses that don't go anywhere. So yeah.
I find this one interesting. Are there areas in which public funds outperform private investments? For example, do more deep tech companies survive thanks to early stage public funds?
Oh, I don't know. You have to measure that. I probably not. Typically, public funds have also higher overheads, and they're typically in the phases where it's much harder. Because there's no private money available. So it could be. I mean, I think the high-tech Gründerfund in Germany has done pretty well. But I don't know, they're specifically in areas where there are no comparable funds. So it's difficult to compare. And if they do it well, they are actually in those spaces where they can take higher risk. Sometimes there is this weird contradiction, is that because public funds, it's public money, they are more risk averse, which is stupid. The government actually should go there where there's high risk, high potential return, big strategic potential impact, and then crowd in private funding. And sometimes we're seeing that there's public money that goes to low risk and crowds out private funding. That's something you should avoid. But actually, I would like to take the question about scaling, because this is kind of also a problem in the Netherlands. We produce a lot of startups, but they don't scale. And then what you can actually do about that? Well, we found that, so look at why these companies don't scale, and it's a lack of funding, but it's also a lack of ambition, and it's also lack of experience in how you scale. And especially in some categories of companies, especially when they come out of research, they will be extended research projects, and there's a completely different mindset to grow a company than actually run a research project. So you have to have active interventions. You have to get other people to run these companies, or you have to support them at that point in time. So what our intervention was bringing experienced entrepreneurs to work with these founders, to challenge them. I think we are much too nice to our founders. We don't have the really tough love conversations, and we let them just continue on a path. Sometimes they're very kind of technology focused or very product focused, and they forget about actually the market. So what you can do in all these acceleration programs, also the public acceleration, if you can only have a tough love conversation where you bring in experienced entrepreneurs and they sit down with kind of the younger entrepreneurs and tell them really upfront, what the opportunity is that they're facing, or maybe they're just in the wrong market. Maybe they have a great technology, but they're just addressing the wrong market, and helping them make that shift, or maybe also confronting them with their role. You might not be the CEO for the next phase, but you might be a brilliant CTO, or you take a board seat. But this is what you need to do for your company to grow. That conversation in Europe, we're just not good at. And usually in the US, you'll have an investor that will have that conversation with you, or you'll have it probably in Silicon Valley at maybe at the coffee store. But here, and I guess in Europe, we're just cheering on. We are so proud that we have founders, that we cheer them on, and we sometimes would help them more with a kind of tough love conversation. So remember, tough love is important.
Okay, that's a good way to end this. Tough love. Keep that in mind. All right. That's it for this panel discussion. Thank you so much for joining us, and please help me give them a big round of applause.
Thank you.